ahead and get started. Welcome to the Faculty Association of California Community Colleges Education Institute's annual policy forum. My name is Erica Beam. My pronouns are she and her. I am accounting faculty at 3 different community colleges, Solano Community College, Sierra College, and Modesto Junior College. I started at the Modesto Junior College. That was where my education began, so it has a special place in my heart. This is our annual forum brought to you by FACCC Education Institute Policy Committee, which serves as the think tank for the Institute and FACCC's Board of Directors. FACCC is a faculty-driven and professionally managed group. Its board is seasoned faculty professionals. We are dedicated to working cooperatively with your unions and academic senate to ensure that faculty voices are heard in the halls of government and across the state. FACCC conducts its annual policy forum to review the major issues of the day and to motivate us as faculty to organize and advocate. This year's conversation will focus on the shrinking of California Community College's mission from threats to solutions. I'd like to give a special thank you to everyone serving on the PAC Policy Committee and helping to arrange the logistics for this event. I know we have a number of policy committee members here today, and I want to recognize them. Debbie Klein, Cynthia Mahabir, Meryl Siegel, Wheeler North, Libby Cook, Kelly Velasquez, Gabriel Torres, Yolanda Bellissimo. We also have most of our FACCC board in the audience, and I'd like to acknowledge them as well. So for the next 2 hours, we will ask the panel a series of prepared questions. We want this to be a conversation. We want you as an audience, as faculty members, to engage with us. We will allow time at the end of each question for questions and answers to engage. Our policy committee members and staff members will be monitoring the questions and answers in the chat, and they'll try to answer as many as possible. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our distinguished panelists. Let me please have them introduce themselves. Wendy Brill-Wynkoop, President of FACCC, Dr. Roxana Marischi, Professor of Education at San Jose State University, and Erin Steinberger, CPA from Santa Monica College. Welcome, everybody. Wendy, you are up.
Oh, good morning, everybody. Is this where I'm going to share my body of work, or is that the next question?
That's next. Just an introduction.
Okay, just hello, everybody. I'm Wendy Brill-Wynkoop. It's nice to see everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm the FACCC president and happy to be here for this conversation today. Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Roxana, yes.
Thank you. Hi, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Rickshana Marischi. I'm a professor of education at San Jose State University. I teach educational psychology in the teacher credential department. And I also teach education policy in our doctoral program in educational leadership. My research is on data justice and prevention of data harms in education. And I've also served as I'm the past chair of the education committee of the NAACP at the state level. I've also worked with them very closely at the local level. So I'll be sharing some of our work as well. I will also say that I'm not representing any of the organizations on this panel. We've got to do that. I'm not representing San Jose State we got to protect academic freedom. So I'll just say that before we start. Thank you.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm Erin Steinberger. I'm out of Santa Monica College. I'm a newly tenured faculty, and prior to coming to education, I ran the $1.3 billion business, a team of 10 for the Coffee Mate Creamer brand for Nestle, and then the $1 billion business for Milk-Bone and Meow Mix for Del Monte out of San Francisco. And I'll be speaking to education through the lens of business innovation and strategy and marketing.
Thank you all. I know we're in a sea of people, so I thought it might be helpful if you were able to see which boxes were lighting up when they were speaking. You can pin or change your view to speaker mode if that's helpful for you. I love the gallery view just because I can see where everybody's, I like the scrunchy faces. I like the facial expressions. So depending on how you like to view a session like this. Next up, we're going to ask everybody to go to a little bit more detail about why they are here, why they are on our panel, how they are studying this, how it affects us as faculty. And we will start with Wendy.
And thank you, Erica. So I have been teaching at College of the Canyons for 25 years as a full-time faculty in photography and digital media. Before coming to College of the Canyons full-time, I taught at Chaffey Community College. I taught at UC Irvine, also 2 CSUs and some private institutions, all in digital media, photography, and multimedia. I mention this because I really chose the community college as a place to concentrate my life's work. One of the reasons that I chose it is we really have this broad mission that I loved. I was a strong academic student in high school, went right into 4-year, went right into graduate school, didn't take a break. But when I got to community college, I really found these amazing students that had all these different goals and missions, right? So the community college is not just this focus on transfer. We help students bridge into college. We also help in the career education area, and then of course with transfer. And in my discipline of photography and digital media, I found this amazing group of students who did not see themselves as a group of students that were college students. And by building up their confidence and helping them find their way, they were able to move on to their bachelor's and master's. So I ended up, after almost 20 years of being in the local level as a leader, both in union and Senate, I ended up volunteering for 3 different state legislative committees, the ASCCC, my union, which is CTA, and then also FACC. And I had a lot of this sort of imposter syndrome when I started. I thought, I have this saying often that I say, I'm just a photographer. What am I doing here in these high level policy conversations with the governor's office or with our educational leaders in our state? And, it's taken me a while, several years, to come to the realization that I'm exactly just a photographer, just an educator, exactly what is needed at these high level conversations about policy. We have a lot of outside special interest groups who are lobbying our elected representatives to drive the educational policy agenda. And they're not hearing enough from those of us who are system practitioners, who are in the system, working with the students, knowing our students, knowing what our students need. So I've sort of made this odd journey from being just a photographer and educator to somebody who hopefully is having really important conversations on the state policy level. And that's, I think, sort of a good background to who I am and what I do.
Thank you. Roxana.
Hi again, everyone. So, oh gosh, I came to education policy work through a really interesting path. My early research, was in school violence prevention. I was in graduate school at the time that the Columbine shooting had happened. And I saw a lot of programs coming into our schools promising, bullying prevention, violence prevention. I wondered what's the principal to do? What are school leaders to do when all of these programs are coming with this really great marketing? And I thought, which ones actually work and which ones don't? So a lot of my early research was on the evaluation of solutions in education. And I saw a pattern, I saw a trend that, like, wow, the ones with the best marketing are actually not the ones that are the best for the students. So I had this critical lens on what is being pitched as solutions. Started to see a lot of social emotional learning. So I was evaluated a lot of those programs. This is coming into our higher ed spaces as well, a real interest to support social emotional health. And I really advocate for the authentic relational social emotional learning. But I also started to see then the datafication of these social emotional learning programs, where they wanted to extract the data of the kids and, like, how are they interacting with the technology. And as I started to worry about the long-term impacts of children's health on screens, I then learned that about the data and the way that the data are being weaponized against our youth and our people. No one's really paying to those data and the youth. So then I started to look longitudinally at like the way that data are being used in educational technology programs. And I saw the intersection of privatization as we saw the dismantling of public education with charter schools and attempts to try to take over our public education system with the privatization sector. It was tied very closely to the technology sector. A lot of tech companies use the charter schools as pilots, as learning labs, to then say, hey, public education, you got to keep up with the Joneses, and you need to now, you know, do the same thing that they're doing. And the same narratives keep coming up over and over and over again. And with the bullying link, and I'm just going to say this one last thing before I pass it on, is that there's a very little definition. There's no clear definition of bullying, but there's usually two aspects that are really critical to understanding a bullying situation. It's when there's a power differential, and those with the most power are doing harm, repeated harm to those with the least power. And so I started to shift my analyses from the playground of looking at, oh, okay, what's happening with the kids and the bullying? And when I started to get into policy conversations, and I went to state board of education meetings, and I saw Silicon Schools Funds and some of these folks with the big tech and big power shaping education policy in ways that were actually continuing to do harm to our communities, especially communities of color, it started to really bother me. And I started to then dig into and peel back the layers of who's shaping policy, who has the power in these situations, who has the voice, and whose voices are going to be silenced, who's going to be denigrated, who's going to be told, oh, you're not doing anything really. And so these are the questions that drive me. I just want to give a shout out to all the faculty out there. My mother is an instructor at Diablo Valley College. She's taught computer science for the past 40 years, almost 40 years. And so kudos to all the instructors, folks who are doing this work, educating the next generation. Really excited to be here and talk. Thanks.
Great. So I'll be speaking on behalf of the project I ran for 3 years out of Los Angeles for the 19 community colleges in LA, which was a strong workforce project. It was a 10 million project basically to grow talent pipelines in areas of economic need, which most of the presidents would call marketing. But we were lucky enough, this is the job I used to do for Coffee Mate Creamer and Milk-Bone and Meow Mix, which is to grow the brand. And growing the brand means taking a look at the competitive landscape to understand who are you competing with in higher ed, and not just higher ed, but alternative credential programs that are better meeting students' needs. Because at 18, people have a choice, and people are not choosing the community colleges or higher ed at the same rate that they used to, which is why enrollment across the nation has been dropping since before 2015. And you can pull that from the National Student Clearinghouse data. And you'll see that the only way to understand why a brand is in decline is to go talk to your customer. And people get upset when I refer to students as customers, but students refer to themselves as customers. And I have a video from a potential student who's not here who speaks to that exactly. So I come to meetings and sort of advocate and bring the student voice, and I find that it ruffles a lot of feathers because it goes against the grain, but it's exactly what we need if we want to stay in business and have a job in the future and continue to educate and do what we love for our students and get them from where they are into better jobs. And so I will be referencing the work that we did, the $1 million of research, in the 6 months that I've spent sitting with non-enrolled students from our system, students enrolled at for-profits or other entities, and talking about why they're not coming here and why they continue to not come to community college at a higher rate, which is driving the declines that you're seeing in enrollment, which started before the pandemic. And I will continue to, again, bring their voice to the table and just hope that people start to think differently about what they want in the design of education today.
Whew. That is some powerful stuff, right? Roxana and Erin, and then our history with Wendy. I mean, I'm really excited. We are ahead of time, so it's okay. You can keep talking. Our next conversation is going to be about what our challenges are, right? And we have very unique perspectives on what those challenges look like. So this will probably be where we spend a large portion of time. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat or comments or anything that you'd like to engage with the panelists, because we will have time in this section for those. So Wendy, what are some of the challenges you see coming from the legislature?
I have like a page of notes, so I will definitely be taking a lot of time on this one. And you know, I'm going to try and put this in some sort of organized way because it does get a little bit overwhelming at times. So first, we do have a lot of outside special interest groups who are driving policy in the name of equity. And a lot of their policies are framed and sort of wrapped in this beautiful little equity bow. And I'm going to go into detail on that in a second. But I do want to point people to a couple documents that they should look at. One is out of the governor's office, the Recovery with Equity report, which sort of outlines our governor's approach to higher, well, just higher education, but there's more than higher education, actually, is public education. And there are, I think if you read that, it's a good sort of primer to understand where we are right now. And most of it, if you look at the end of the document, you can see the contributors from special interest groups that sort of wrote the document, but it's it's out of the governor's office. So you can see sort of the marriage there. It refers to quite a bit the Cradle to Career data system, which is a data system that is intended to track students from the cradle to career. And it's going to be using artificial intelligence to guide students through their educational and career journey. And I also would love to point out that there is nothing sort of more systemically racist than AI, artificial intelligence. It is built by somebody, right? It is those choices that AI makes are created by some human. And often that human's bias is embedded in those choices. And so I think that we have to realize that if this system, this Cradle to Career data system, which was through Taylor Bill language in 2019, is being built, we've spent at least $50 million on it. We're going to continue to spend money on it, and it will be implemented. And if you would like another good source, Automating Inequity is a book that is a great example of looking at AI and the sort of systemic system that it is. I think what we see with it's out of the legislature is a narrowing of the California Community College's mission. So we have a mission of lifelong learning, of remedial education, of career education, and transfer prep. And what we've ended up with is a focus over the last decade of more and more focus on transfer. And while we focus more and more of our energy, our resources, and our time on transfer, the other parts of our mission are being narrowed and being atrophying on the vine. So my concern particularly is both remedial education, but also career education. I'm one of those disciplines, digital media and photography, that sort of has a foot in the transfer camp and the career path. And we can see that already in career education, that when we're automatically placing students into transfer level math and English, that often they drop out, stop out, or we don't get them in the career education programs at all. So we're diverting all of our students to the transfer path and preventing them from even getting on the career path. I know that Erin's going to talk more later about the structure of those pathways in the career education area, but I'm more concerned that they're not even getting to those pathways and that we're not spending the time and money that we need to build those pathways appropriately because of the transfer agenda. And now the transfer agenda is not a bad agenda. That's an awesome piece of our mission, but it's not our only mission, and it's not the only thing that we can focus on. And I think what is missing with the legislators is they don't see that often the career, if we get students on a career pathway where they're successful and they gain confidence, that they can then be put on the transfer pathway. They don't see themselves necessarily as somebody who could get a bachelor's degree, but through a career program, they often get there. So here's this sort of cycle in the legislature. We'll have a corporation, let's say Microsoft, and they donate money to their nonprofit philanthropic arm, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and that's tax-free. So they're taking their billions and putting it into a nonprofit organization so that they don't pay taxes on it. And then that nonprofit philanthropic group, like the Gates Foundation, will then donate money to a special interest group. There's many of them. Just as an example, one is the Campaign for College Opportunity, but there's many, many, many more. Okay, so then this special interest group will fund research, and the research often highlights something that we're failing at in the community colleges. We're failing our students. We're not transferring enough students. We're not getting them through career programs. We're not, our programs are old and dated. There's lots of messages we hear, but it's all negative. And they will fund this research that highlights that, and they'll put out a very glossy report, and the glossy report will be tweeted out, and they'll have a big, webinar announcing the report, and the report is sent to all the legislators. And often then there is a bill proposed in the state legislature. Sometimes it's not even through the state legislature. Sometimes it's through trailer bill language like the Recovery with Equity report. And there is an oversimplified solution to all of our problems. And it's usually sort of applies the principles of corporate efficiency, right? This corporate model, because education is slow and inefficient. So it's oversimplified, and it goes through our legislative process, supported by direct donations to candidates. So we have, say, Microsoft, who is funding this through a couple steps of nonprofits, but then those corporations can also donate to campaigns directly of politicians. The legislation passes, the mandate's implemented, but it's not the right mandate, it's not the right fix. The faculty voice, the staff voice, the administrative voice, the district's voices are not loud enough, and we're saying this isn't going to work, it's going to fail, and it does fail. So there's a mandate, and then we fail the mandate, and then what happens? They write another report saying we're failing our students. So it's a vicious cycle of they're saying we're failing something, they have a piece of research, they have the fix for us, they mandate the fix, they get the fix through, we try and implement the fix. I can't tell you how many mandates in the last 10 years faculty have tried to implement, and we're exhausted, and yet we're still desperately failing our students. And so if you look at the real sort of outcome of a lot of these mandates, they drive students to take out more loans, or we're driving public dollars to the private sector because the private sector can fix it faster than us. We have all sorts, maybe even we don't want our students to critically think because we want to shove them through programs as quick as possible so they're not as strong thinkers. I have no idea, but often it's not equity, right? In the end, even though this all started with, I'm going to put it in a nice equity bow, we often see that these mandates affect our students of color the most. And the last thing I want to say, because I know I've talked for a while, I'm sorry, but all of these mandates also narrow our mission. And as they narrow our mission, our enrollment drops, right? Because we're not able to feed those students into our career education programs. We're not able to help those students who need remediation. And often students who don't want to be on the transfer pathway will drop out because that's not the pathway they choose. So we see this enormous enrollment decline because we are not serving our students in the way they want, but the failure is not on us. We have to look to these legislative mandates. We have to start to dismantle those and say, you've set us up on this course. You've said we failed. You keep giving us these mandates, and we need to take back our system.
Thank you, Wendy. Sean has a question in the chat. I'm going to direct it to you. My concern is AB 705 and the message we are hearing in mathematics is that we can no longer offer pre-transfer level mathematics. To me, this is contradictory to the mission of the community college. It seems that we only focus on transfer students now and not those who need the remediation, like you just mentioned. What is the view of FACC on this issue?
So FACC has remained neutral on AB 705. The original language of AB 705, if you go back and read the bill itself, is really pretty tame. We're trying to maximize the probability that students will get through transfer level math and English in 1 year. It doesn't mandate it. If you then look at Title V Code of Regulations that came out from the Chancellor's Office after AB 705, AB 705, by the way, was in 2017, then it's a much stronger language than the actual bill. And then there's even guidelines and memos that are even more narrow. So the bill itself, AB 705 FACC was neutral on. I think we did have some remedial pathways that were way too long for some students, or not even appropriate for some students. Some students really should have been directed to the statistics pathway, for example, as opposed to the STEM pathway. There is a new bill. We have not taken a position on it yet. It's AB 1705. Again, Irwin. It's 2022. It just came in print this week. We have been talking to the author's office and to the chancellor's office about it for over 2 months now. And if you read the bill, it mandates that students are not only placed into transfer level math and English, but they're also enrolled in transfer level math and English. So that is probably going to be the hot topic of this legislative season, is that bill.
Ornette, I see your hand.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you, Wendy. I think the real concern is what you just touched on. That is, what do we do with districts that just overreact or overreacted and continue to do so to AB 705? And I see them do the same thing with AB 1705 if that bill passes. As faculty, is there anything we can do? Because many districts really just eliminate all the basic skills classes in math and English, and then and students, as Erin said, those who dropped out because they feel they don't belong, they get squeezed out. What do we know about them? Because the data that have been shared at all kinds of events are only focused on those who chose to stay, those who will succeed regardless, not those who need us the most and get squeezed out. So for example, for Los Rios, Los Rios already decided to eliminate all the basic skills level English classes. And that has been very troublesome for our students. And now math is the one that will get squeezed out beginning this fall, that we no longer can offer anything below transfer level math. And Sonia just put a message in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ornette. So I think the key is data, right? I think that's the piece that we're not missing. And actually, FACCC was successful in amending AB 1705 before it even went into print, to make sure there's an important piece of data missing, which is students enroll in a class on day one and they drop before census because the class isn't what they need or want. And that attrition from classes has not been recorded. It has not been documented. It was not part of collection of data with a bill, AB 1805 from Irwin, that asked for those 1805 templates. So when the story is told through data that AB 705 is the greatest thing since sliced bread, it's not looking at who it's not helping. And it is very difficult to argue against the data that organizations like PPIC are putting out, the Public Policy Institute, or the California Acceleration Project, saying how great AB 705 is when they're not looking at who it's leaving out. And so AB 705 is this idea of maximizing throughput. They're putting more students in this bucket, right? And they're catapulting the students over this wall, but there are a lot of students who are hitting the wall or not even getting in the bucket. And the reason is they're not ready, or it's not appropriate for even their pathway. It's not even something they're interested in taking. So I want to make sure that I give enough time to our other guests, but this is going to be the big legislative conversation. And at your local levels, you've got to get faculty together and you've got to have this conversation. You've got to get them interested in advocacy, because without 55,000 faculty talking to their legislators, we will have our mission narrowed even more.
Thank you.
I see Sean, Paula, and then Howard, and then we will move on.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for taking my question. I just wanted to follow it up with, I think that AB 705 is probably great for 70 to 80% of our students, but that we're leaving a chunk behind. And it's really interesting to me because we talk the talk with equity and everything, but that 20% that we're leaving behind is exactly the population of students that they're talking about with equity. And, I do think that we were offering too many remedial classes in the past, but, eliminating them is just insane. I mean, it's insane. And we're doing it, and we're being told, I'm in the Riverside Community College District, and we're being told by our administration that yes, in the fall, we have to show with data that, offering these remedial classes is the best thing for those students. And it's impossible to show that with the data, especially during COVID, because all the data is all messed up for COVID. So it's just really, like people have been saying in the chat, it's really surreal what's going on. And I mean, for some of those students, they need that remediation, because they didn't get it in high school. And yeah, I mean, we're a community college, and it's strange, it's just very, very strange. We've been full-time faculty for 21 years, and it's very weird what's going on. And I just wonder what like the real agenda is here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Paula?
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for speaking on this topic. I was really excited to see it was on the agenda for today. So thank you all. I agree with all the speakers. I'm a former FAC board member, and I did attend a policy and advocacy, I think, conference in Sacramento several years ago. And I basically went to Sacramento because I wanted to really speak against AB 705, since there was a panel that was speaking on it. I believe maybe the previous speaker might have been on there as an ESL instructor, but it was very biased. I did speak against it. The two professors who were advocating AB 705 were really upset. So it's been a really sore spot for me because everybody's kind of believes it. Our faculty believe it. Our college instructors support it. So I just think that it's just a slow going and trying to fight AB 705. So I've always wondered, could we not have a class action lawsuit against the chancellor's office because of all the students that have suffered, been either excluded, damaged, left out. So I just feel it's taking so long, and I don't know, maybe is that a possibility? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to address a lawsuit against the chancellor's office. I mean, it is the law, right? And I think that if you go back and read AB 705, the actual legislation, I think you would probably agree with most of it. It is not as narrow as where we are right now with regulation and with guidelines and with this upcoming. So I think we need to put our effort into this AB 1705, which is on the table and is cleanup language that will take a lot of what is in regulation and memo and make it permanent, and it'll be law, and then it can't be fought. So I think it's very important that we're all here and now. And I think it's also important to remember that a lot of what AB 705 did was good. We had these remedial pathways that were too long. And what happens with educational policy is often when we correct, we overcorrect. And so this is a bit of an overcorrection. And it's important as educators that we don't just say we're going to fight AB 705, because then people stop listening as soon as you say that. But we say this is what we're leaving out with AB 705. When you acknowledge to somebody like Irwin's office that her legislation did help our students in some way, but it didn't help all our students, and these are ways that these are other students, or these are the students that are left out, or this is the tweaking that's needed, then you're going to get further in the legislative conversations.
Howard, I see your hand.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this conversation and Wendy's focus on the mission. And as a computer science faculty member at Santa Monica College, I just cannot help but share the following story. Imagine if Steve Jobs were currently in our system attending Santa Monica College. That's a student who never graduated. He never had an education plan. He never actually focused on a degree. He took classes for the love of learning, and that is where he learned about topography and art and these things that change the world. And if Steve Jobs were in our system now, the college that enrolled him would be marked as a dismal failure. And so I think focusing on the mission is a really, really important topic. All of these movements have greatly damaged our mission. And there's currently a Steve Jobs right now who's being marked as a failure, being forced to take classes he or she does not want. And that is going to have a permanent scar on California if things keep going. So Wendy, thank you so much for all you're doing. I know it's a really hard fight. We really all need to be involved. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Howard. Ian.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Howard. I wanted to pick up on not only the mission, but what Wendy said about the corrupting influence of special interests. And that narrowing happens, I think, interestingly, in two ways. There's the obvious one of the corporate funding interests narrowing what we should do, but sometimes we do that to ourselves. And I think one of our strongest tools is go back and look at what the original Ed Code said about what we were supposed to be doing. It's remarkable language that also talks about our relationship with CSU and UC systems. But when it talks about mission, it's written in a peculiar way. There's like 4 parts. So the first one says, a primary mission is traditional lower division academic and vocational. And it says we must do that. Interestingly, it then says we may grant degrees. So it does not put degree as the top priority of what we're doing in academic and vocational. The second one in there says, in addition, we'll do remedial education, adult education, and community education. And the wording on that one is also shall. We must do that. So losing that is in direct violation of that Ed Code language. Workforce, interestingly, was added as a 3rd primary mission, but it was not curiously added with the words shall or must. So I think going back to that gives us a lot of power, and what we see current legislators and current corporations doing is narrowing in all sorts of ways that benefit their corporate goals or that benefit the chances of getting reelected in the next couple of years, but do not look at the long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. We're going to stay in challenges, but we're going to switch gears a little bit from AB 705 and 1705 and talk about technology. Erin, what are some of the challenges you see as far as technology?
So we have a lot of challenges. I think what we heard from students in research, again, for 6 months, and in a career ed field, which our whole job is based on technology and using technology every single day, multiple products. We don't have enough of it. And as a result, we have major skills gaps between the workforce and education. And those are easier to see for those of us who are newly in and still out doing consulting. And it's like you're stepping back in time. And students know that. Students are actually, when you go into research, they're actually very educated on where the jobs are and where they want to go. And you can see that if you look at the UC system down and you Google majors that are impacted, all the majors that are impacted at the UC level are where the jobs are: computer science, engineering, business and economics. And what's happened with our students is not only are we not giving them the technology they need from the UC system down, because I do want to point out that the UC level is teaching the same exact class that we're teaching with the same technology, but charging 3x the price. So even though we have gaps, they have gaps. There's this misnomer that, oh, they're doing something better. No, actually, it's the same exact product. And they're just charging more with a better branding name. It's a branding play, which is kind of ironic when you tell employer partners that, because they don't realize that we're all just doing the same thing. But we've been dependent on, 5 major publishers that have product engineering teams, because we need product engineering teams to build the simulations that mimic the workforce. Faculty can't do it on their own. We've been dependent on them to build curriculum that's aligned with the workforce. And unfortunately, they've been falling behind because they were bought out by private equity back in 2003. A large share were taken public. And as a result, it's not to their best interest to develop the most aligned workforce skills when that costs more and that can reduce the net income. And you see that in their financial statements. They have a major share in economics, math, accounting, And so when you think about, well, why aren't they innovating? It's because employers keep buying bachelor degree talent without the skills they need and complaining about it and thinking that faculty actually make that content, but we don't. We're dependent on a third party. So Calbright was supposed to be that other party, actually, and we tried partnering with them at Santa Monica because whether you like it or not, if they were supposed to help us and our students, we were like, okay, whatever, we'll do it. But then they noted, this is 3 years ago, they noted that they were coming up against the same innovation barriers that we were coming up against at Santa Monica, not being able to get contracts through procurement, not being able to get, curriculum developed with third parties. And so we're stuck. We've been stuck for 4 years asking for help and nobody's helping. No administrators helping, nobody cares. And it's been extremely frustrating. So the technology gap that's missing in education is what's allowed other competitors to launch and take market share away. And that's what's making students go choose something else because we can't compete. And Calbright is not stepping in to help us compete because their restrictions are the same restrictions we have because they're also the government. And so we've been sitting here asking for help. And finally, last September, I decided the person who's hurt the most are students and employers. So I started presenting the truth to employer partners, saying you need to understand what's happening because your pipeline's at risk from the UC level down because the state of California can't get its act together and support faculty in getting us what we need. And so what we need is a centralized team where faculty get released in career education with funding that we can outsource the development, just like NASA did with Tesla, because they can't get it done either because they're the government, but we can take government funds and outsource the development through RFPs of the curriculum that we need to start to compete again. But until we do that, we are sitting and we're watching other competitors come in and take our spot with no way to fight back. And that means that everybody's losing because most students are here for a job. That's also what we heard in research. And they want to be treated like a customer from the minute they show up to the minute they transfer. And that means better systems, better hand-holding, automation. It goes against a lot of the conversation today, but you have to ask yourself, is it what you want or is it what students want? Because if we don't do what students want, they will stop coming like they have. And they will, and if you doubt what I'm saying, I'm happy to share the 6 months of research where all the student quotes are there. And there was another comment in the chat by Dov about what about 4 years are too expensive. That is the number one thing that comes up. That it's too expensive and it takes too long and people are struggling. They can't spend 4 years in a classroom. That's a very privileged view, right? They need a job, they need a quick way to get in, and they don't want to sit in English and math for 2 years. We heard that over and over again. So that there's this large body of students that want something else that we aren't serving and they're going elsewhere. And now all the colleges in the state of California are feeling that with the enrollment decline. So again, if we don't start pivoting to be more student-centered and designing around what they want, then we are not going to be here in the future. And you're seeing that. Colleges across the nation, especially at the community college level, are on the brink of failure right now, cutting classes, running on their last bit of CARES funding from COVID. And everybody's talking about resizing. You probably saw what happened, San Francisco. I mean, it's everywhere, crisis teams in San Diego. So it's time to really say, are we going to sit back and continue to fight to do the same exact thing we've always been doing, which there's less demand for from students? Are we open to changing the way we provide education? And I mean, that's a question for the larger group, but if we keep being tied to what we're doing and we don't have a support team released to faculty to go out and do what we need, we're stuck. And we're going to keep losing because technology moves and all those jobs require technical skills. And it's actually the one thing that has a high correlation with education. Education is one area that you can actually teach technical skills better than some other soft skills where you can learn that in the workforce and you can do, and that's been done. The World Economic Forum came out with a report with McKinsey on future of work. And it went into like what skills are highly correlated with where, education can play a role and where can you find these elsewhere? Of course, you can find soft skills here as well, but it's like we really need to own technical skills because we're losing our students as a result.
Yeah, many of us have leaned into OER, right? Open education resources, but there's a huge gap for technology. And Erin and I have chatted about this offline, right? We're both in accounting, and the technology component and being able to stay, at pace or even ahead in order to teach it is really difficult with OER resources. Even if we do have funding to develop the content, The technology piece is out of our hands. That's very difficult to develop.
Yeah, and actually, Erica, that's such a good point, because along those lines, the same day that OER email came out saying apply in our large, so I'm going through the like 3 pages of requirements, right? The labyrinth that'll take forever to fill out. The bottom says large scale 30,000. The same time I was talking to ASU, because we don't have a team here to support us, so I'm going to another state for support. I just want to point out how ridiculous that is. And the ASU team saying it's a minimum to build like a basic build curriculum, 40,000. So our large scale won't even get me anything that a student wants to consume on their bare minimum entry point. And just to give context of what it costs to develop courseware, there's a course called Bio Beyond that has been proven to drive retention and completion in higher education. And it's because it's a better experience. It's designed around what students have said they want. They want a Netflix level, really cool experience. It leads with a question. It's like a movie. It's really cool. You come home, you're going to want to watch that. And what happened? They see their retention and completion go up, but it cost $1 million to build, right? So $1 million to get something that will actually drive consumption in higher ed. And we get 30,000 if we spend 5 hours filling out the first part of an application and maybe get chosen, right? So I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that our state has left us with no centralized team to compete, no innovation team. And that's what ASU and SNHU have. So those two competitors that are growing have moved on flexibility, moving more online to meet the needs of learners today that can't access physical education, right? Which we presented on this prior to COVID. And people didn't want to move. Math was stuck. No, we can't put it online. Well, that's what our student needed. They needed us to solve that problem, not to say we can't do it. And so that didn't happen. Now we're all online. Great. But we still don't have the curriculum that students want. We still put you in English and math for 2 years, even though we don't say, what's your goal? Do you just want to take some classes that are in film or in media production or in accounting and start you there? Or do we keep forcing you into the 2 years? Because that's why they're not coming. And maybe they'll, pivot back, but we can't keep dictating how people learn and the path that they learn it on.
Yep, I see 2 hands, Dov and then John.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for all of this. So this, I'm not sure exactly if this is the exact right spot for this comment, but, in terms of technology, this is what it's bringing me to this thought that, one technology area that's a real problem with our colleges, Chicago College, is that we have a website that's dysfunctional. Our A&R system is ridiculous. A student shows up to enroll in the class and they have to go through this whole ridiculous system that doesn't always work, and it is so many steps. And that's, of course, the first thing that they're being faced with our school. So that sends a message. Meanwhile, I'm noticing, the focus has been so much around assessing teachers. We're constantly having to deal with, as faculty, all of this assessment stuff. So I think the whole SLO thing is a bogus.
I think you may have muted yourself, Dov.
Sorry, I didn't intentionally. Sorry about that. But our accreditation is based on our SLOs. So there's all this energy on campus. Get the SLOs on your syllabi, update your SLOs in Curriculum, all of that energy and all of that money. That's a lot of money. And we're scrambling to try to put pressure on the college to try to just fix the website. And that's not part of accreditation. Why aren't they looking at our website and forcing us to have a better AR system? So anyway, that's my comment.
It's funny you mentioned that, Dov, because one of the pain points were the websites that came up over and over again, that they can't find where something is. I feel like I'm Indiana Jones searching for the login, right? And we heard this over and over again. And then, we're not indexed, and there's actually security issues across all the websites. They're not secure. And so, we, again, presented all this out, but it does require change from a state level with leadership to actually want to change the system and not just a local level trying to figure it out on their own because they can't.
Yeah.
Go ahead, John.
Okay, hi, thank you for this. Sure, I agree that students want jobs, of course, but that's not all they want. They want, I teach sociology, by the way. And it seems like this kind of focus on jobs and focus on the economy and focusing on getting them in and out and not teaching soft skills kind of devalues what I do. And what I do is like, I talk about social issues and, ways to critically think about them so they can be solved. And these students are very worried about not just their economic future, but COVID, climate change, racism, all of these other things. And it seems like, of course, this is something we should do, but all of these other, it seems like, all of the things I do is either secondary or just not important, because students often come up to me and say, I want to major in sociology, but my parents think I can't find a job in that. So I'm majoring in business. And it's like, I think that there's much more than an economic model that community colleges are for here. So of course, I do agree with what you're saying, but I think that there's a lot of other things that are being ignored here. So thank you for this.
Yeah, and not to downplay the value of other disciplines, but more that it should be left to a student as a choice and not a requirement. And if they want to be on a choice of a pathway to a degree, then, great. But if they need a job and they want to shortcut that and maybe come back later to do that, they should be given equal opportunity. And we should put the goal first and not dictate the learning pathway. And again, students hear about who's good and who they want to take, and they do want to learn. You hear that, I want knowledge, I want this, and they go to Rate My Professor and they read about people and they take them, not that, even if it doesn't relate to their job, but because they realize that's a valuable class. So if you have value, you will sell, your class. But I think it's, and hearing you, I'm sure your class is great, but the problem is we can't dictate what people buy because we're asking for their time and money. And they're not coming. They're saying it's, and I actually have a video that I could play near the end, but it's from a student who's not enrolled saying exactly that. I am the customer. And that's what higher ed hasn't caught on to, that I am the customer and it's my money and time, and I don't want to be dictated to how I learn. And that's the environment we're in today. And if we keep saying you have to do this, then they won't come.
I see Howard and then Kim.
Hi, Erin. Thank you so much for this. I've spoken to you many times about your work, and I really appreciate it. The question that I'd actually like to ask you is, I've heard what you think is not right. I was wondering if, with your brand and business background, you could paint a picture of what it would look like if we were doing it right. Like, what is it we actually need to do as opposed to what we're not doing?
That's a great question, Howard. We're going to get there. We have an entire section just for what we would do to fix it. So hold that thought. Erin will get back to you. She has plenty of time for that. Kim.
Hi, everyone. There was a number of things that kind of caught my ear in this discussion. I think that, and I don't know about the technology piece, so I'm just going to go on record to say I'll buy all of that because I really don't engage that much in the technological part of education. But there are some things I think that are larger messages that we need to be cognizant of. As a communication studies major, I can appreciate the soft skill conversation, but I think we need to start talking about those as essential skills. They're not soft skills. Understanding how people interact and communicate and their patterns of behavior are all really critical skills, both in college and out of college. So I think sometimes I feel like we are our own, crown of thorns in the way that we talk about what we do sometimes. And I do think that learning about interpersonal relationships and having great family relationships and intimate relationships are just as important as getting job skills, right? Like we're trying to do all of these things. So I always get a little itchy when I hear the sort of they are customers model. And I do understand what you're saying in terms of attracting students and keeping them there and giving them the competitive experiences that they need and adapting to them. I don't downplay any of that. But I also kind of live in this world where I think, my students would also like to not have textbooks or take exams, right? And if I'm just thinking of them solely as customers and what they want, that becomes kind of a weird place for me to sit. So I feel like even on the FTE conversation or the loss of enrollment, I think there are a lot of factors that are driving that. I think the pandemic obviously is driving that to some degree. But look at all these bills. The AB 705 guaranteed a whole bunch of enrollment loss because we got rid of remedial classes. ADTs absolutely decimated our language programs to a large degree for liberal arts degrees. We now have AB 928 that's going to drop off another X number of units. We have guided pathways, which sole purpose in life is to get rid of units that students are taking and streamline their activity through the system. And so I think that, you know, these are really complex problems, and I think this is definitely a piece of the complex problem. And I do agree, as somebody who used to sit on the Calbright Board of Trustees, they're not going to get us out of this anytime soon. I promise you that. But nevertheless, I mean, I just wanted to comment because I feel like sometimes what I think about is how we have to live in this world, or we seem to always be in this world of reactionary policy making and driving, where I'd like to continue to look like what's the step outside. We've talked about this influence of outside organizations, like how do we start influencing that influence? Or when we talk about SDSU or CSU getting X amount more money for the same students that are going through, that's just systemic racism, you know. And at what point are we just going to start calling it that you're giving the least amount of money to the most diverse system of higher education? Like at some point, I think we have to stop being mired in each issue and think kind of like globally, how can we start to challenge the way that we talk about these things, like calling them essential skills instead of soft skills, talking about how technology plays a critical role and what specifically, you know, we're lacking there in terms of funding. And I know that we do all that, but I don't know. I just wanted to add that as a food for thought, that I think that we just have to be careful that we're trying to transcend some of these things that box us in, I think, sometimes, and not to get too mired in not seeing the bigger picture of what's going on sometimes. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I'll just say that I think soft skills, you know, they come up on LinkedIn's top 10 skills in need, right? So they're definitely in demand and needed. I think the issue is that students should still have a choice what they want education to be. And when they're choosing a bachelor degree program, they're going to get soft skills. I mean, that's what they're choosing. But we need to give equal choice to non-transfer pathways that go to jobs for people who just need to get out of where they are and be able to pay their rent and maybe have a little bit more to survive, right? And maybe come back later or not. But it needs to be that they're put first and their choices are put first, and we don't dictate those choices.
Thank you. We're very fortunate to have Roxana, and she has a very K through 12, a larger picture perspective on the challenges that she sees for technology. So I'm going to ask her to speak on that.
Thank you. Oh, I'm unmuted. So thanks for the mention about K through 12. And my perspective is really, I want to give a shout out to Wendy for the amazing introduction that you did on this policy aspect of it, because when you mentioned the cradle to career data systems, that is what this is about, unfortunately. And so it is a pre-K through P20 perspective on what has been happening in our policies and shifts from teachers to tech over decades now. So a couple of comments about some of what's been said before. I wrote 2 pages of notes and I'm not going to be able to get to all of it, but we need to understand who's driving the narratives. There's an amazing book called Winners Take All, The Elite Charade of Changing the World. That is by Anand Giridharadas, and he talks about philanthrocapitalism. This was my introduction to understanding some of the ways that the foundations, the billionaires who don't know what to do with their money because they're going to get taxed on it. They're not going to pay the taxes so that we can, as a public, decide how to spend those public funds. But they're putting it into foundations, and many of them are tech-based foundations. HP is at the root of OER. A lot of people don't peel back the layers to look at, oh, what's the new thing that's coming? Philanthrocapitalism is at the root of all of these policy shifts. And so when Wendy, you mentioned special interests involved, those are the special interests. It's the Gates Foundation, it's the Walton Foundation, it's Eli Broad, and folks that have been doing this for decades now in the K-12 system, exactly the same patterns that I'm seeing now in higher ed, except that higher ed is caught off guard because we haven't been paying attention to K-12. So let me talk a little bit about, so if the question was originally around like, what are the challenges around technology? I think the challenges are being able to recognize the doublespeak, to recognize that when they're coming to us with equity in the proposal, saying this is going to serve Black and Brown students, to recognize the doublespeak in that. And I've done an entire presentation on philanthrocapitalism and equity doublespeak, when innovation with exploitation and Silicon solutions fuel the next level systemic racism. That's what's happening when the pitches come from the tech industry to say we're going to solve all the problems. This whole narrowing of the curriculum, saying the only majors that matter are STEM because that's the only thing that the world is. No, we need mental health professionals, we need teachers, we need police officers, we need social workers, we need librarians, we need people who are going to serve the public, we need politicians who understand and have critical thinking skills and who understand when they're being lobbied to by special interests, right? And so I think that there's a really amazing opportunity here for some public education around the political system and who's driving it and what the mission of the of college, community college is. I think that's something that the California Community College Faculty Association really needs to look very closely at. Reclaim your own definition of what is an education. Is it workforce training? Is it to have Amazon create a module that's going to train the workers how to work faster, because efficiency is also at the root of a lot of these initiatives. They're going to say that public education costs too much. It's going to take too long to go through four-year college. So they're feeding these messages to the public, to the students, or they're going to be listening to it and they're going to hear all these narratives. And there's a lot of media involved as well. You see impact journalism is funded by a lot of these philanthrocapital foundations. And by the way, philanthrocapitalism is really, there's a philanthropy. They're giving money, but they're not doing it as a gift. They're actually going to get a return on investment. There is a profit motive at the back end of it. And if they can show results, they can, which is usually easy to gain metrics, then they get a return on investment. So you get more articles about the need for STEM, and then they get, so there's many sectors that they're involved in this. It's not just education, but we're seeing it because it is, these are the systems we're in. The other thing I wanted to mention, in that book, Winners Take All, there's an entire chapter dedicated to McKinsey, not in a good way either. So McKinsey is one of these consulting firms globally, goes around all over the place and says, what's wrong? They're going to say, this is what's wrong with the system, and here's what we're going to do to issue the solution. And I can't count how many presentations I've been in higher ed where McKinsey is cited as the expert on, future trends, and this is where the trends are going. Look up the McKinsey scandals. Okay, and look at what they've been involved in shaping markets and shaping narratives, and then say, is this who we want to listen to about the direction that we're going into? The last thing I'm going to say is about the push out of students. So in the privatization, and I'll post some, next time someone else is talking, I'll post some resources in the chat, because I have gathered content curation pages of the best of the web on, articles, research, updates, et cetera, on privatization. So the charterizing of our public education systems. I think what we're seeing right now in the community college is a charterization from the inside. When you see public-private partnerships, and this is the other aspect of the impact investing that is involved with philanthrocapitalism, is you're going to have, and it's interesting, we had a little conversation about this just before we all logged on, right? Well, who are our partners, right? And so when you have a public system and they're partnering with a for-profit entity or nonprofit entity that says, okay, now we're doing this shared project, and then you do research and there's an evaluation to see, did this thing that we did work or not? We are actually contracting out the research element of it, and that what have been IRB protected protections where the participants involved we would have informed consent about how their data are used. They would know that they were being researched on, right? But when it's in the private hands, they can say, well, this is just a private, they're not going to give up what they're doing. And this is something that we've seen, and I'm very, very concerned about. I've written about this with the National Education Policy Center on social impact bonds, social impact investing, and the privatization of our public systems, because there's money being funneled in, again, with that narrative that our public systems are failing, and they're failing because we haven't funded them appropriately. We keep slashing the funds and then saying, oh, we don't have enough funding to do what we need to do. Billionaires come in with the solutions, but they want a return on investment. And so then right now, the other thing I would just say is we need to pay attention to public-private partnerships and not take the media bait that this is a good social good. It is, there is a trap in the back end of it that basically takes away the public governance aspect of what's happening and puts it into private hands. There's data at the back end. And the biggest thing that I think we need to really talk about, and maybe in another session, I would love to do another session that with, better understanding of what the, what's going on, but to really talk about emerging technologies. So when you talk about OER, when you talk about the cradle to career, trajectory, when we have these big data companies that are gathering not just the academic data, but that the quote soft skills, which is really social emotional learning, those kinds of behavioral metrics that they're saying is going to make a good worker. They want them to be compliant, they want them to follow directions, they want them not to rock the boat or to demand something different than the industry wants. And they're looking for those kinds of folks to hire, right? Well, what about everyone else, right? Oh gosh, I'm all over the place. I have so much more to say too, and I hope there's time. So what I'll say about the technology, there are part of what I study is the prevention of data harms, systemic prevention of data harms, which we have not done a good enough job of because people don't know what the traps are. The architecture behind the proposals that are going to be coming at you, it's going to be on what is going to be called, and they don't name it this, but that's what it is underneath it, is blockchain digital ID technology. So a lot of the ed tech programs that I have seen in K-12 launched, again, through the charter schools. Those were the initial labs where they piloted these things. They get funneled through, they all tend to actually store their data on Amazon Web Services, over 300 ed tech programs that I know of, stores it on the cloud. Again, you can have a strong contract with your own institution, right? But we don't know, this is a big data. And so when you talk about predictive analytics and surveillance capitalism and the kinds of weaponization of data against our communities, the ones who are the most harmed are the Black and brown communities by data and problematic algorithms that have been set with baked in algorithms that are already set with racist systems, right? And so what are happening to these data? How are they being used? And with blockchain digital ID as the architecture underneath these new learning ecosystems, OER, open educational resources for folks who are not aware of that, and there's a ton of funding coming forward about that. It's going to be a way where they can actually track each user and every interaction that they have with a learning material, right? And so one of the reasons for the shift away and literally like attempt to dismantle, to shut down, and we have seen the closure of some of the community colleges already, right? But to shut down the brick and mortar schools and to shift everything to be online modules. And now I can't imagine with the module creation from partners of what they want to the curriculum to be, rather than what faculty are saying matters for like a real education. They're going to have then control and access to the interactions that each student is going to have on that system. They already have it, unfortunately, with Canvas. That's one of the other publications that I have, that I cracked open Canvas to see how what the data analytics are. This is a learning management system that is being used, pre-K now, K through 12, but definitely all the way into higher ed. It's the majority of our higher ed systems are on this learning management system. So We need stronger data protection around the use of these data. That has to happen, I think, at the state and the federal level around like data privacy laws, but that's not, you know, this conversation. But I think that among faculty members, colleagues, educators, we need to have a better understanding of the architecture underneath these online systems. Assessment is at the root of this. And so when you look at the ways that they're trying to say, is the student who they say they are, and are you validating this is the person they say they are, and there's like this ID, you know, identification system, and some of those remote proctoring systems that are using facial recognition to try to say, oh, did the student, you know, log in, whatever, are they cheating or not, right? Some of these remote online proctoring systems have algorithms that do facial recognition and they do not recognize in the same way. They flag them more frequently as cheating. They literally have suspicion scores on some of these. And these are the systems that unfortunately, we've been sleepwalking into just adopting these systems without a critical lens. Students are fighting these, but without a critical mass of people saying, you know, no, we don't want these kinds of systems. We don't want the surveillance predatory tech to watch us while we take an exam. If we don't listen and start to pay attention to these critical questions among the students that we have already as well, we're just going to sleepwalk into a system that we can no longer come back from. Very concerned about blockchain as one of the new emerging technologies. The big picture on that, it's a digital ledger, cradle to grave, and sorry, grave is a little bit morbid. They're saying cradle to career makes it sound a little bit, you know, less morbid, I suppose. But the idea is that, and this is the danger of it. I'm just going to try to give a summary, and I have some slides I'd like to actually present later if there's time. But you can never delete data on a blockchain. And so if you can imagine all of any mistake that you have made as a youth, right? I have a student who was disqualified in her, you know, earlier education pathway, and is now a doctoral student, and is saying, gosh, you know what, if that would have flagged me as not being, you know, potentially successful in some kind of an algorithm, to never have gotten into a doctoral program, right? If we allow for these decisions of who gets to move through the pathways based on algorithms, we are doing an absolute disservice to the students. If we allow for the big tech companies to drive our policy, we are handing over our systems to folks who are interested in profit. They're not interested in our community. I will say they do a really good job. Again, you look at the websites, beautifully done, absolutely gorgeous. They've got the black light, they've got all the, you know, all the things that we want to see, but you look at the way that, you know, workers are treated. There's amazing movements within the tech industry of workers who are waking up and basically saying, no, we won't build these oppressive systems that they want us to. And so I think one of the other, maybe I'll save this for the later questions, like what we should do is to also like connect with folks that have a critical lens on these things. By the way, I do think that, you know, obviously here we are on Zoom, right? We're able to have this conversation and be able to teach remotely. I think there's value to this technology. We just have to implement it in ways where we're not allowed, like with guardrails, with legal guardrails against the exploitation of the data and the use of those data to try to fit students into a pathway and to have those algorithms decide where they go. There's one, I'll just end with one other thing. There are some foundations or entities that are now partnered with our higher education systems to do these predictive analytics that come again with, you know, foundation funding. They say, wow, there's a need to understand graduation rates, right? And again, get everyone out in 4 years. That's the efficiency model. But if some students may say, you know what, I'm okay getting it in 6 years because I want to work. I don't want to take out a loan. There are cultural differences in the extent to which students are willing to take out loans, and families, you know, believe about, you know, should I do FAFSA and like get a federal loan and then pay off a debt, or I want to pay for my tuition right up front. And if it takes longer, so be it, because then I won't be saddled with debt. So these are all things that we have to consider. And the last thing, I keep saying the last thing and I keep bringing up more, sorry. But with these partnerships, we have to be very careful and read the fine print and make sure that students understand fully what they would be getting into in case any of these workforce partnerships involve what's called income share agreements, ISAs. This is this new innovative, financing model where basically they're going to say, oh, we're going to pay for your education, free college, free education. But there's a catch. And if, you can only get that tuition paid if you give up 15% of your salary for the rest of your life or however many years that contract is. And then you're basically paying much, much more. Those students are paying much, much more than they would have it in some kind of other loan or anything. There are all kinds of choice programs to this last comment about, the choice. There's all kinds of coding boot camps. Like, we need to teach kids coding, right? This is the job of the century, right? Like, students need, right? But then look it up, so many of them are closing. How do we ensure quality with these alternative programs? There's so much fraud, there's so much scandal within the choice sector, and we've seen that over and over again with charter schools. Like a third of the charter schools are closing within so many years after they open. And so again, we need to rethink what does it mean to be educated and talk about, look at the I guess the predatory traps within the proposals that are being put forth. I have so much more to share and I'll stop.
Thank you, Roxana. I think it's interesting as a system, most, if not all of our faculty positions do not include research. They do not include the time and space and ability to either develop or determine, the appropriate use of this technology. And I think as a system, that's partly why we have gone out to these public partner relationships in the amount that we have, right? So what do you think the faculty role should be in changing this or creating a landscape that does protect the data, that does benefit students in this?
Well, I think, and this is something that I've shared about publicly, and I don't know what the feasibility of this is, but if you're involved in a public-private partnership where there's an evaluation of some kind of intervention that's coming, right? Like to say, oh, this thing worked, and because this worked now, let's do more of it, let's fund more of it, let's make this institutionalized. If they're doing research, it's an intervention, it's new, it's different, right? I think they need to, at the very least, go through IRB type protections. Maybe it's not, an IRB, but students who are involved in that need to know. They need to be fully informed that they're part of a, project. Their data are going to be used in some way. They might be labeled. They might be, tracked. They might be put forward towards this pathway or that pathway or something like that. But corporations, they're not going to want to do this. This is going to give up their, or students might say, no, I don't opt in. I do not consent to my data being used in those ways. So full informed consent, I think, is one thing that's really important for these public-private partnerships. And then I guess just greater awareness of the ways that what is again being called data-driven or learning analytics in the policy space, it's a double-edged sword. It's going to help us understand what's working internally. We need to use it within our systems to do better, to serve our students. And then we just have to be careful and really understand the ways that it can funnel students who are very interested in a particular job away from that job, because another course is going to be higher. They're going to have a higher likelihood of success based on some past data. And this has happened. It's national media has opened it up. The markup has been looking at this with the EAB system, Education Advisory Board. And this is a program that I don't know if the community colleges are partnered with, but when they came to the CSU, it came with all kinds of marketing for, predictive analytics and 10 years worth of data. And my question is, wow, if it's 10 years worth of data and students are in the CSU for like 5 years, are they going back into high school? Turns out, apparently they are. And there's data systems from K-12 that are then merging with higher ed. and then they're recruiting students based on their past performance. So what do public schools do? Or sorry, what do the charter schools do? They recruit the students, and this is the whole in the special students with special needs. They're going to recruit students with a mild, special needs. And then the public system, which does not have the funds, proportionally to meet the needs of the students with moderate severe, are left with less funds. And then differential comparison of who's succeeding and who's not. It's the same with the scores. They're recruiting the students who are, not or English language learners, and then saying, oh, look at our superior, so there's ways that the enrollment is then being shifted to game metrics, and then to say, oh, look at the success, look at the failure, and what's happening. I could keep going, I'll stop.
Erin and Wendy, what do you see as faculty's role in changing this environment, or in this changing environment?
Well, I think we need an elevated voice that actually somebody listens to, for one, because without that, we can't actually get any help or support to do the job we thought we were hired to do. That turns out we really can't do in the current environment. I think I agree with Roxana in terms of regulating data and access to data in a learning environment, how it's used. But I believe that technology has a positive role to play, and we use a lot of adaptive systems. And frankly, the business model of the community colleges are dependent on those adaptive systems so that the business faculty and career ed faculty can serve a larger amount of students, right? Without them, we would actually have to cut our head count, which would cut funding, and that would put a lot of departments at risk. So I want to just highlight that, because we're always called the cash cow because we're serving 180 to 225 students in our department versus an English department serving 75. Not to say that that's not right, but just to say if you cut us down by taking an adaptive system away, it would have a financial impact that would be horrendous. And also our adaptive systems work really well for students. We have the highest CPA pass rate at Santa Monica, and it's because we have good systems. Now, our publishers have problems, but one of the problems is not the back-end adaptive system for homework, quizzes, exams. Students actually cite that as one of the things that's helped them. So our publishers are like a partner. They just could be better, and we could use funding to make it better and get better publishers. But we don't have that today. And so I think that having a voice at the table that listens to, hey, here's our problems and here's some things we need, and having a leadership team that would clear the path, which is typically in a government environment, in a corporate environment, that's what you would get. You go to your VP and you say, hey, I need this cleared, and they get it done, right? So that you can do your job. It feels like we don't have that in our system because for 4 years we've been asking for help and we haven't been getting it. And so what we did was, again, I went out to employer partners to say, hey, your pipeline's at risk, and now this is having a financial impact on your business. And I don't mind that my job is to get students into jobs because my students want that. So I'm doing whatever they want, and they want to get into jobs. I understand there are students that want other things, but in career ed, that is what our students want. So we are student-centered because we're trying to get them from point A to B. And that does mean that they need technical skills like AWS Cloud, which Howard at Santa Monica did, to get them into cloud computing jobs, right? I mean, that's where the jobs are. Tech is in every job. Tech is the foundation of what's asked for on every sort of job posting for many fields. And so it's to leave it out as, and to not have a solution for us to continue to evolve at the speed of tech will just mean that we are eliminated from the market, which is exactly what you see happening as students are choosing other programs where they are moving at the speed and they are placing them. And I think we have to acknowledge the risk in other choice programs by regulating them, but also the benefit they provide, because we aren't doing that. There's obviously a need there and people are buying it for a reason. People don't just sign up and buy something because they were duped by good marketing. And we heard that over and over again in research from students that it was faster. It got me there quickly. Again, happy to share all this research so you can read it for yourself. I'm not trying to spoon feed thoughts here, but I think student voice should be front and center for everybody, and the decisions we make should be all about our students, period. I think the other thing is when we think about corporations in higher ed, most of those employees are, for a lot of us, they're our friends, okay? And they also came from our systems, the Cal States, the UCs, we produce that talent. So to criticize the very companies with the talent that we made as being all bad is just crazy, because those are students that were produced by the UC and Cal State and community college system. And those are people making choices. And we can't just assume that all these people have ill intentions. Most of them want the same thing. They want students to get into their companies so that they can have a better life, a better job. So I think, again, the way we do that is we have a seat at the table where those conversations are happening, and people start valuing our voice, that we can solve problems together, but we can't solve them if we're left out. And if we're left out, it does feel, someone put something in the chat earlier about it feels like we're designed to decline. And I would say we are designed to decline right now. The funding formula is designed for us to shave 2 to 3% off every semester, which is what's happening. And when you look at our for-profits, they're all of a sudden up 9%. We're down 3% every semester. That's by design. If you plug the revenue at the top and then your expenses go up, you can only plug the gap by cutting classes. And when you look at the budgets across all the systems, you see that happening. You see faculty as a percentage of total expense going down, administrators going up, and then we keep cutting classes, right? And so we've basically guaranteed through the funding formula that we can't get employer engagement, because we can't provide scale, because we have no way to provide growth. And so, maybe 1 class, 2 classes, but that's not enough. So we need, again, that voice at the table to start elevating these problems so we can solve them together. And in absence of that, which it does feel like nobody values our voice, then we are going to decline. I mean, that's what's happening. If nothing changes, and we'll decline.
Should I go next?
Yep.
Yeah. Wow. Downsize is what I read in the chat a while ago, which I think is we are being downsized. And I think that as faculty, our role is not to fall for this divide and conquer narrative. So I hear some people might be hearing something from Erin and from Roxana that are in competition, and I'm hearing that what we need to do is we need to make sure there's balance and nuance in educational policy. And that's the role of faculty, right? We always make decisions based on research and what our students really need, rather than what some outside pressure believes. And so, the other thing that's sort of rolling around in my mind as I'm listening to that is we're in this conundrum where our job is to prepare students to go into corporations. I mean, that's what most of them are going to do. Some of them are going to go into the public sector, but we do prepare students to go into the corporate world. And yet that corporate world, and it is, even though we might partner with them and we might have to work with them, they are influencing us through these nonprofit special reform groups and so that nuance and balance is not there. They have complete control over our system at this point in time. And just an example of that is our own state chancellor's office. They've had a foundation forever. And if you look at sort of what that foundation did years ago, 25 years ago, they did large college buys so that we could pool our resources, so that we could have a lot of what Erin is talking about, having some sort of state partner that can help faculty get the resources they need. Now, 25 years ago, it was books and software. It wasn't the same kind of tools that she's proposing, but it's the same idea, right? And now, just last week, the Chancellor's Office Foundation had a report to the Board of Governors, and they brought in $106 million last year from corporations, $106 million. And they're doing competitive grants. And those grants that are coming in from corporations are really driving that narrative. $106 million is about $10 million shy of College of the Canyon's whole annual budget. So it's an enormous amount of money. I think that I hear Erin saying, as faculty, we really need to demand that we have system resources so that we can develop tools for faculty to teach, or our students are going to go where they're finding the tools that they want, which is places like ASU, which are pooling their resources. And I also hear Roxana saying we need to be careful about privatizing education, and this, particularly this data collection, which is an absolute real threat. We've had times in our history in America where there has been attack on specific groups, and data has come back, right, to be used to attack those groups. And it's not just our students, by the way, that the data is collected on. In Canvas, faculty are also, every click, everything you enter, every message you send in Canvas is also being collected. So it's not just students. So, you know, the question is, what do we do? We have to be engaged, guys. We have to wake up and understand that it is really balance and nuance in this educational policy. And as faculty, we need to be involved in what's happening, what is happening with the data, how do we put up guardrails, how do we use technology safely with our students, but also how do we create those pathways, both to transfer and career, that our students want and will show up for. We are being downsized. My concern is that they're using divide and conquer in this narrative to downsize us, right? It's accelerating rather than saying, as educators, okay, I can see Erin's point and I can see Roxana's point, and how do we find the answers? And I'm going to hold some of those answers because I know there's another question coming up. But I do think as educators, we need to insert ourselves as experts, particularly in front of legislators, because they're the ones that are making these policy mandates. We need to counteract this message of we're failing our students. Who the hell would sign up at a community college right now with all the horrific narratives about how terrible our community colleges are? I wouldn't, right? So we need to counteract this narrative with the public and with our legislators. And then the last piece is, if you look at K through 12, which went through this, and they're kind of coming out on the other side of that, although I have a better expert in the room with Roxana on that. But they're sort of waking up from, it started with No Child Left Behind. I want to say it was like 1990. And they're sort of waking up from the haze. It was NEA, which is one of the largest unions in the country, the National Education Association, right? Teachers union, they were a supporter of No Child Left Behind when it started. And they realized what a mess it was, and they came around. So the other thing I think we need to do as faculty is we need to use every organization possible to spread the message of, come on, guys, we need to be involved in and look at these things with very, very keen eyes, look at these policies and decide that, you know, where we can influence our voice. And I don't feel that all the unions are demanding a seat at the table like they should be. I'm just saying all the unions, because I'm not going to call any out particularly, but I do feel when I'm in legislative offices saying, you know, I don't think this is such a great idea, I'm not hearing the union voice as loudly as I would like to hear it. I think I'll leave it there.
Could I respond to some of her comments? Thanks.
Go ahead, please.
Thanks. So, with respect to the divide and conquer, I just wanted to say a word about that, and to share a little bit. You know, obviously you've heard pretty much mostly critical perspectives from me on anything technology related, and I just have to say my early years in academia were actually, I was a tech evangelist. I was one of the early adopters of Canvas, faculty and residents to get folks on board, a tech, you know, considered one of the tech savvy folks. And I love technology. And I think that there are so many tools that can be, you know, helpful and supportive. One of the things that is so deeply troubling to me is a report that I read in 2012 from the Global Silicon Valley Asset Management Group, and this is highlighted in a chapter. I will share the chapter up there. So it's a 330 something page report, and it's about how education innovation is going to transform education and everything. And at first, when I read it, I thought, oh my goodness, there's like these. I wondered, is this a joke? Is this like for real? But no, it's for real. And they were like very seriously wanting to take over education. And I was like, wait, who is the author? What is happening here? And as I'm walking through this, and this goes to the divide and conquer, like we have to be careful not to get caught in those traps. unfortunately, that's been laid for us. They have very publicly laid it out that the good people in this fight are the innovative technology companies that are going to provide access for all the failing public schools, and the enemy are teachers' unions. They have word terminology. They have literally images of the union, back in the Civil War, the Union soldiers. There are battle images. There's literally a strategic battle plan that is 15 years long, that includes lockstep every single thing that we've seen, from the Common Core standards to the increase of charter schools to Teach for America, to all of these things have happened. I thought it was a joke until I saw, damn, they really did this thing. This is happening. This is actually happening by the year that they predicted it. And so the fact that it was an intentional, very deliberate denigration of the teachers, faculty, unions within this report. The author of this report is, the vice chair of the Center for Education Reform, which has been heavily promoting, the charter schools, and they were one of the only organizations that, attacked the NAACP's, moratorium on charter schools. And so there's all these ways where everyone is wanting to claim, the narratives of, who do they represent and who's doing the best for the community. I do think we need to listen to community members, and we need to listen to students, absolutely. And I just think that we have to also believe the folks who are the equity partners, the folks who are going to be profiting off of the data at the back end of many of these companies. And Erin, I really appreciate that you mentioned that some of the partners that we're working with, there's people within these organizations who are our friends, who want to do right. They want to change their organizations from within. I get that. I understand that. And I think that the folks at the top who are making the decisions, I do not necessarily trust that they are interested in the well-being of our communities. I do believe that looking at the macro structures in the decades of what is a kind of a battle between, industry and labor, to recognize when they have said that this is a battle, this is a war, we have to kind of believe them and recognize, oh, right, well, what are we going to do to at least try to protect our systems? And if we're going to say we're going to partner with the people who are trying to take us down, I don't know what that looks like. I would love to be able to be around the table and be listened to in an authentic way. I don't think that it's happening. I think that if anything, there's information gathering to try to, just shoo us away. I don't know. And I do think, we need to work collaboratively, and at the same time, I welcome any recommendations to be able to then put some guardrails around the data, because this is an age where data is oil, right? Plural, data are oil.
Tony has raised their hand multiple times, so I want to make sure we take that question before we move on.
Yeah.
But I promise I won't ask a lot of questions. I really appreciate it. I've been in the business of the community colleges for 25 years, and I'm an EOPNS counselor. So based on the civil rights movement, that's where EOPS started. In fact, Paula Munoz is a good friend of mine who served as our EOPS statewide president. On that note, what I was hearing is Roxana's point, Erin's point, Wendy, thank you, and Erica for basically serving as our representative. There is one thing that I can share with you. I actually can tell you the number of times that I can actually say I ushered in a president by shaking his or her hand or that person's hand, and a year later he or she left. And what that talks to me about is the lack of sustainability within the leadership of organizations, let alone the extent to which they know what's happening. Now, on the point of knowledge, Roxana, right? We're talking about data. People know how to use data. So we're not talking about that, but we are talking about that, right? But I'm saying we, in terms of those of us who are in a capacity or in a position to make that an open declaration, that that information is being utilized in a certain way. But then on the flip side, Erin, as you're mentioning, data does drive policy. And so I always see the irony of the two words, public policy, right? You have to really think about that, what I just said, the irony of those two words, public policy. If you really think about that, it's going to make us be more aware of this. I just wanted to share a couple of points, and that is that this isn't something new to us. It just happens to be that when the dollars get pulled, dragged, or dropped in certain ways, they can be manipulated positively or negatively. I heard about the student success funding formula. I know everything with all due respect. I was working with back in the days in the 80s and 90s Matriculation Act, right? And then everybody wants to do what, you know, student center funding formulas. Next thing we have a Student Success Act. We're all aware of that. But with that being said, the question is, as I think Wendy brought to our attention, how active are our unions involved in this capacity? Are they aware? And I'm not saying that we are passive nonetheless, but at the end of the day, are we aware? Do we know the real issues? And what will be the walkaway template that we can preach for, be it the next year or two, even when we leave? What will we be leaving behind? Will it be something sustainable? And so legislation is the way. And I believe that once we have that, that is important. We need to, and I did reference a couple of ABs, and I read the ABs. I read all the proposals with all due respect. I see all the line items, the trailer bills, and I want to see who negotiated those trailer bills. And I want to see who was in there. And Erin's kind of going, yep, I know what you're talking about, right? Because there is a bill, and at the end of the day say, well, let's look at the shall language, the must language, the intent of that bill. So on that point, I think we need to get what's considered to be, and I'm sure we have, Wendy, and we've done this all the time, position papers. As much as we can, if it's going to be a position that we can sustain for the next 4 to 5 years, so be it. If not, we say, listen, this position will only be for the next years, because you know this AB member, Assembly Bill member will only be here for the next 2 years. Because we're going to court the next one, with all due respect. I know this, including the SBs, the Senate bill, right? So anything that we say and what we do, we probably should be having some position on at some point in time, and just say, listen, we need to be more aware. We need to be more educated on how the data is being utilized and how the data is driving public policy for employability, short-term skills development, career tech ed, right? And everything else that comes under the bus that, as I think we had talked about, the mission has changed. And the mission can be interpreted differently, even including among certain community college districts. So I think we need to understand that. So if we have sort of this, perhaps some sort of paper or draft that we can hold to, we can share that with all of our districts, and in this case, our colleges, we all at least have an understanding. And once we hand that over to each FA union, we all know where we stand united as one front, because that's what I stand for in EOPNS. When you impact a student in Mount SAC, you impact everybody. And so thank you for sharing the position papers. But on this matter, we are trying to represent everybody. And in fact, just so that the everybody is the even non-EOPNS student that has not yet been served. So that could be the student who's not EOPS eligible, but who can benefit from some level of instruction. I will grab that student and say, what can I help you with today? You may not be eligible for EOPS, but let's see if we can do something to help you out with. So that's how I see this from that level. But those were my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
I was going to say, I'm going to call Tony. I'm going to call you to help out with some FACT committees next year, just so you know. You're on my list now. Thank you.
One last comment from Orny, and then we're going to move forward.
Yes, thank you so much, Erica and Tony. I agree with organizing, with needing to voice our concerns, talking to legislators about who we are, what we do, about our students, and so forth, so on. And I also agree that we need to be, to organize more and to be more active. Is there anything we can do? Let me put it this way. I think it's wrong to say, I don't think that we are all passive or we don't participate. They keep faculty darn busy all the time. One initiative after another, one legislation after another, one push after another, one other rule, one other issue. We just don't have time to breathe, seriously. So I think that's something that we also need to address. And we have been downsized. We have a limited number of people who are working on so many union issues. I'm not saying that we cannot be active. I'm just saying the tactic is keep faculty as busy as possible, reduce their size, have a smaller faculty size. They are not going to have enough people to participate or to organize. It's darn hard. Thank you.
Thank you, Orny. So from what I'm seeing in the chat and from what Orny just mentioned, we are hungry for action, right? We are hungry to do something about it. So we'll start with Erin. How do we create an incentive structure which rewards that growth?
This is a tough one, but at a minimum, you have to have an incentive structure that allows you to serve student demand, whatever it is. And so today what happens is, you get the prior semester's schedule, they roll it over, they shave off units. And that's not student-centered, that's just historical centered, right? Based on whatever history was. And because it keeps getting rolled over, it's just from, who knows, 10 years ago. And then what happens is you get feedback from students saying, well, I needed 12 units, so I was forced to take this class. And so what we really need to do is figure out a way to be completely demand driven so that students get every class they want and you kind of see where the demand falls so we can reset. But we haven't been able to do that. We also need to be demand driven in the sense that if we can't drive and scale programs where there's demand that's not with the college, so students that are out in the market looking for something, a program that can get them to a job, when we turn on marketing and we drive that to the college, if we can't accept the demand and like filter it out to the different colleges if one's at capacity, then we can't get engagement from employer partners. I mean, every time you talk to an employer partner, inevitably it comes to scale. I need scale for a return on investment. This has happened with 4 partners, right? So for the last 4 years, with strong workforce, the $1 billion coming down saying grow short-term pathways to jobs with employer partners. And here we go engaging with employer partners and we can't give scale because we've been on plugged funding, which disincentivizes and causes, colleges to cut classes. So it's like, why would you send $1 billion down and then put a plug in the funding and not put a solve for growth, at least in areas of demand? And I know that because I ran the marketing for the 19 community colleges in LA. And once we turned on marketing, we were able to grow pipelines in the areas of demand, nursing, business, trades and construction, which was welding, engineering. It perfectly aligned actually with what the economy needed, which meant that students out in the market who aren't enrolled know where the jobs are, want to enroll, we're willing to come to community college. And what happens? We send all the leads to the colleges and they don't enroll anyone. And they didn't do it because there was no incentive to. And so I think one is we have to, again, look at the funding structure and say, how do you sort of hold harmless, but also incentivize growth? And that's a tough question. And it's also not my job to figure that out. But I'd be happy to be on a panel that problem solves that. But it's not going to be solved on the call today. And then the other one is we need, again, a state level team of faculty that are released and allowed to lead in their discipline to help support the others, because it's a full-time job to do curriculum. New curriculum development in tech areas is a full-time job. And you see that, again, other institutions that are growing rapidly have full-time innovation teams. ASU, Southern New Hampshire University, they have what they call labs. And multiple labs for ASU, and we have none. So of course we're not growing because we don't have a team dedicated to growth, right? It is a full-time job, and acknowledging that it's a full-time job that can't be done in addition to teaching 180 students has to be something that's part of the discussion. And then I think we just have to always put students first. So when they show up to the college, we need to think about reimagining that student journey. So we ask them, what do you want? And we also need to tell them, I think to me, this is no different than somebody signing up for a mortgage who couldn't afford a house. If we don't tell you the job opportunity and average salary at the end of that pathway, and we load you up with 6 figures in debt, and then you end up with a job that you can't afford to pay that debt, I don't see how we're any different than a for-profit. I really don't, because you've just disadvantaged that student for life. So to me, actually, University of Phoenix does have something called a one-sheeter. And before you sign up, and I'm not saying they're good, but they are doing something that is better by being more transparent about opportunity at the end, the courses it takes to get there, the cost. Now, this might sound familiar. It's called Guided Pathways, and it came from them. And the only point was to be more transparent with students about, hey, here's all your options: degree pathway, non-degree pathway, return on investment. And we help students understand that before they make a decision. That would be a brand that cares about you. A brand that doesn't care about you would put you on pathways and not let you know what's going to happen at the end. And then you end up with all the comments and student feedback and research that said, that person just wasted $100,000. Now they have the same job that I do and they can't pay down their debt. And you can read across LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, all the comments right now on student debt are about just that topic. So we need to get a lot better about growing areas where there's student demand by better understanding what the demand is. And I'll leave it there for others to chime in.
So there's lots of calls in the chat for our action plan. And so If you were the deity of the day, what solutions would you recommend? And we'll start with Wendy.
Sorry, I was muted. So rookie mistake on a panel. Okay, so I think I talked about this sort of cycle of special interest group sort of calling us out for failure, glossy research showing how we're failing, proposing some mandate which gets through the legislature, which is mandated upon us, and we're so busy trying to implement somebody else's solution to our system that we don't have time to even think, much less teach, much less do some of the great ideas that we've talked about today, before there's another glossy report coming out saying we're failing. So this sort of calling us out that we're failures, creating another solution, making us spend time on that cycle it's got to end. I mean, it's got to end. So we need better voting rights laws, right? We need tax reform, particularly when it comes to corporations and their donations to their nonprofit organizations. Dark Money is a great book by Jane Meyer, if you want to read about that. We need campaign finance reform. I mean, I know these are big things, but this is really part of the problem. And so on a more simple level, I guess, if I listed those, I would love to see 55,000 faculty meeting with their legislators on a regular basis. I would love, when on a regular basis, I mean monthly, and you have 2 state legislators. And so every single faculty member in the system needs to develop a relationship with their representatives and assert themselves as the expert in the system and let them know really what our students do need. That's what I would love to see. If we don't do that, if I'm a deity for the day, their legislators are elected to legislate. That's what they're going to do. They have a possibility collectively in our legislature of 5,600 bills in, can you guys still hear me? My headphones are going, okay, hopefully it'll keep up. 5,600 bills in a 2-year cycle, and they're going to propose bills. We're a huge portion of the budget of state of California, and bills usually only make it through if they have money, and we have money attached to us through Prop 98, billions of dollars. So we're going to continue to see bills proposed, and if we want to end that cycle, we have to fill that queue of bills, right? We have to provide the bills for the legislators that are the right bills, because otherwise they're going to pass bills, period. Either way, that's what they do. That's what they're hired to do. So we're not going to stop the bills. We have to replace the bills. If we don't, we're in trouble with remedial education. We're in trouble with, or basic skills, however you want to call it. Career education is just atrophying on the vine. It's being starved because of the concentration on the transfer agenda, which is, again, not bad. It just is all focused on that. And then we're seeing, like with Common Course numbering, we're seeing a narrowing of what classes will actually have. I think the goal is to get it down to about 20 transferable courses, and then we won't have anything else in our system. So we're going to sort of be like the high school model, right? They have a very narrow curriculum now compared to what they used to. I know that doesn't sound like a very positive deity to the day, but yes, there you go.
Erin, your turn.
Yeah, so we'd have a central team where we're released to actually do our job and given the time to do our job. And if it's more than a union contract, just like the academic senate, you layer in sort of that salary component of being a 12-month salaried professional, which is fine with a lot of faculty, but a lot of time that's left off the table. We're provided the support and clearance from a strong leadership team to help us clear the path when we need it, because inevitably what happens when you're changing any organizational structure is you're going to come up against barriers, and you need someone who's strong at the top to clear that path for you. And if we don't have that support, then you could put a team in place, but we're basically going to guaranteed to fail. And then I think you start also on the student side with when they come, it's all about them and being fully transparent on all the options available to them the return on investment of their time and money and what that means, and making sure whatever they choose, that's at the very first stage of before we enroll you in any pathway, that it's all about what they want, not what we think education should look like, what we thought it was for ourselves, because it's not about us, it's about them. And if we stop making it about them, then they will continue to not come. And again, that's what's happening if you pull the data across the state. There's been some comments in the chat, and I will put my email for those of you who want the student data from the research project that we were on, and I'm happy to share that. Very happy to get the student voice out as much as possible about the things that aren't working for them. Dream state would be that all of the pain points in that document were flipped and reversed. And I think the only way that we can do that in terms of like cost and time is, again, to think about what the state's had documents come down about. It's like people are going to boomerang in and out of education, right? Get some skills, go get a job, come back, and like being flexible for people in their lives so that we can meet them where they are versus asking them to meet our design today. And then another key piece of that is I think we really need to eliminate the 12-unit requirement. So many students tell us that, especially now that they're struggling in the pandemic, they can't take 12 units is like a second job, and everybody's working a full-time job, plus they have kids. How are you supposed to take another 40-hour job? I mean, it's insane. And that's what students tell us, and they drop out because we are dictating, this is the number of hours you have in your life, this is the pathway you're on. It's like, we need to free students to have choice, to be able to say, no, I don't have 40 hours, but I have 10, so I can take one class. Because the class that, Erica, I know you're teaching the same, our class is at least 20 hours. It's a hard class. We instead of doing 2 classes, we do 3, instead of doing 3, like the Cal States, we condense it to 2, which means really jam packing a lot in. And it's taking a lot of students, and they struggle to keep up in other classes. And we shouldn't be penalizing you because you don't have time in your life, which is what the system does. It basically says, oh, sorry, you didn't have 30 hours. So it's kind of a privileged design, which is insane because we have all these equity conversations, but we never talk about people's time and cost because of those 2 biggest barriers. So yeah, if I was a deity for the day, I would free the learner to have choice about how much time they have, what they're willing to pay, and let them know all of our pathways and all of the return on investment under each pathway. And as long as everybody chooses with full transparency, then I don't see a problem with the system. Unfortunately, I don't know that we'll be freed or supported to redesign what needs to be done before others do it for us, in terms of not just our system, outside the system. Because again, if you look at all the competitors popping up that are scaling quickly, they are scaling quickly because they are meeting students where they are and we're not.
Yeah, our ability to be agile, right? And think outside of the semester box or the short term or the movement of competency-based education, right? Our ability to switch gears and rethink how we offer our courses is difficult, right? It takes work groups and task forces. They have to, try it out. And then it takes a long time for it to become part of our system. I think that all impacts it. Roxana, you're up.
Thank you. I will agree with the flexibility language. I do think that we do need to provide more flexibility. And some of what I've found troubling that I've heard from students, the pressures of having to take a full load while they're in, and like the almost like messaging of like, did you register for all 15 units, and this requirement that they take a full load, again with the intent. I think the idea is we need to get you out in 4 years or out in a particular amount of time because that's success in education. We have to undo that definition of what does it mean to be successful as a college graduate. If they want to take a longer amount of time and work part-time, that needs to be part of the definition of success, and feeling educated and feeling as though you got what you came for, you were able to process the information that you learned. I worry about the cramming of multiple, like many courses all in one, in order to then say your funding is contingent on this. And so that's something that I do think is going to support students to be able to stay, to feel as though they're able to have some flexibility. I also started, I think someone had mentioned something in the chat about the word choice. I've come from, it's changing in a number of ways lately, but having been in the space where school choice has been used, unfortunately, as a vehicle to dismantle public education and to basically highlight that 1 in 5 charter schools that's doing better, right? And then to say, we're not even gonna look at the other ones that are failing or that are actually, exploiting our communities or problematic or fraud. I just think that we have to, I don't know, the language that we use might actually backfire in terms of the good that we want to do. And so I'm a fan of choice. I really think that we need to have choice in all kinds of ways. I just think that flexibility is probably gonna land better in the education spaces. As far as, God, like, what if we were deity for day, if we had power to do anything, right? I really wish that there was some kind of education around, again, the architecture of the data systems that we have been primed to promote as solutions. So again, the competencies, the badges, the micro-credentials, they sound so good on the surface. It sounds really good. I'll share a brief story. 4 or 5 years ago, there was one of these tech-funded foundations that was trying to promote like micro-credentials for teaching, like learn this skill and be able to show that you mastered this skill. And I signed up for one just to see, oh, it's data analysis. What are they teaching, right? Because I know data, I was in a heavily quantitative doctoral program at Michigan, so I understand data analysis. It was a joke of a course. It was basically take an Excel spreadsheet with 30 students, run a correlation, and say what their grit score is compared to their math score, and then it was an absolute joke. So the quality was, I will say, 0 out of 100. It was not a course that anyone should be accrediting, and it was written by, I think, folks who didn't understand data analysis at all. But it had the label of micro-credential and data analysis. And so then someone signs up for that, gets their little badge, and then now there's this, system of competencies that we're believing is actually going to reflect a person's skill. And then they get a job, they don't know what they're doing, or they can't actually do that thing. We have to understand that that's also part of what we're setting up when we say competency-based, unless there's some legitimate understanding of like what exactly are we talking about, and that if on the back end this is actually going to be on blockchain digital ID systems. And you mentioned SNHU, right? Southern New Hampshire, you're right. They're one of the first universities that piloted blockchain block certs, right? So I hear these things and I'm like, wow, this is actually, so that sounds like a good thing to me. It's a red flag that those that are piloting these kinds of things, maybe they want to serve the students and they're caught up in the narrative of like, this is a good thing, but unless they know that blockchain is at the back end of it, and blockchain is not only going to eventually be tied to folks' educational academic records, and it's pitched as a way to verify your credentials, which we all want, right? Why wait 2 weeks for the credentialing office to send your diploma when you can get it immediately on your phone as a digital wallet? Well, when those digital wallets are then going to then merge your attendance data, your academic data, your health data, your financial data, in some of the other countries where they're trying to pilot these blockchain initiatives, they're saying even voting records. People need to understand what blockchain is. And when they say you own your own data and you set your own permissions, that could very well be a Theranos lie, where they say, here's the hype, this is the thing that you're going to be able to do. But then it's a bait and switch, and we actually can't do it. And those data are now out in the open, it's a distributed ledger. These are things we have to pay attention to and not bite the bait, or at least vet these companies and these credentials in the back end of the architecture in such a way that we are not going to be duped. I truly believe the people that are promoting this, they have the best intentions. They really do. They think this is going to be equity access. And I just think that when you peel back the layers and see the data systems underneath, it's really quite frightening to see who's going to have the access at the back end, something called data operability, and that's interoperability, which just basically means sharing across systems. And that's being pitched as a good thing. And I think it's actually going to be a very dangerous thing for protection of students' data privacy. So that was a lot.
Can I jump in here for a second? There's two things that I heard. And I think we have to separate out that concern from the data and the competency-based education, because I do know that there are students who don't have time to take a semester-long class to get skills that they need, right? And so I have sat through a 16-week class that was worthless in my life, just as worthless as a 8-hour competency-based credential. So again, it is the quality. It's not necessarily the length of time or the focus on skill versus critical thinking, right? I mean, I think there's, again, it's balance and nuance. We have different students who have different needs. And I do like your use of flexibility over choice, because I didn't think about that with K-12, but that's important when we talk to legislators to use words that aren't going to trigger some other idea in their mind, right? But I do think it's important to provide that flexibility, because again, the mission of the California community colleges is that we do it all and we take the top 100% of students. And so we can't, and then I want to circle back around to what one of the things that Erin was saying about the full-time units. That is part of this transfer agenda, right? We need to get them through and get them out. But I don't think that when that, by the way, that came from the Vision for Success and Guided Pathways and the student-centered funding formula. But so that we're supposed to put students in 12 to 15 units a semester so that we can get them through, because we need these bachelor's degrees now for our workforce. But when you really start to peel back that onion, you know, the Vision for Success in the Chancellor's Office was written by one of the top people from Lumina. Lumina is student loans. We know we don't have the traditional student who is from upper middle class, who can afford to take 15 units and not have to have a job, and their parents are going to pay for them to exist so they can just speed through education, their higher education, right? Most of our students aren't those students. So they're going to have to take maybe 3 or 6 units and sort of work their way through. And what our student-centered funding formula did is put them all into the Pell Grants. It monetizes them to take out the Pell Grant in community college, which they burn through in 6 years of community college. And then when they hit the 4-year, now they're taking out larger loans because they don't have the Pell Grant anymore. So we have to look at like these agendas. It's not, is the goal to increase transfer? Sure. But are there other motivations behind these legislative mandates? Yes. And that's part of that is the data. I mean, talk about MOOCs. MOOCs is all about data collection, right? So there's mandates behind these mandates. There are more than that goal of equity or what we see as increasing transfer, which sounds like a great thing. And I think we always have to go back to that piece. And that's what, you know, freaks me out, is that we're not seeing that, right? The legislators aren't seeing that, faculty aren't seeing that, administrators aren't seeing that. Thank you for letting me jump in. Sorry.
I also jump in now too, because I have a comment about Lumina Foundation, because they have heavily funded a lot of the higher ed policies and initiatives and grad rate and all that. I remember when looking at their website about maybe a year and a half ago, looking at some of their reports and some of what they've been proposing. And again, there's a lot of the data involved, right? And I just remember one line I read and I thought, well, this is what it's about. It says it's about knowledge, not college. And so here's this foundation, tech-based foundation, right? Partnering with funding and guiding and driving a lot of the policies in higher education with a very clear, you know, saying basically it's about knowledge. So we forget about college. They literally, that's like a quote that I don't have the page number, but I promise you I read it because it was a little, it was, you know, catchy, right? But it's really troubling too, because if it's really to just be a knowledge delivery system, this is what you need to have this skill. This is how you need to do your job. This is, you know, and it's not about college. And I think maybe my definition of college is becoming outdated, but it's about a well-rounded education, critical thinking, understanding the world around you, understanding history, understanding. And if we say that that's too much and that's too difficult and it's just going to be too difficult, then what's our definition of education? I don't know. I think we have to really think about that. But it's complicated, right? Thank you.
We do have a question, John.
Yeah, thank you. Unmuting. Hey, this is a great discussion. I want to, speaking as a sociologist now, about the path forward. I think we chatted and did this in the chat a little bit about really expanding this into a grassroots movement, going beyond the legislators. We have we have friends. We can talk to our friends about what this problem is. They're very interested in education. Most people are. And their friends have other friends. We can use our social media. We can reach a lot of people this way and put it in, develop relationships and put it in language people can understand. We can link with other organizations too, such as unions, such as the K through 12, CSUs, UCs, social justice organizations, because this is a social justice issue too. We can link these frames that we have with the framings that other organizations have, because it's a similar kind of battle. You know, if you want to use the war language, you know, it's a similar kind of thing, and we all have an interest in it. And the problem is the these, especially the philanthropic organizations, are so good at framing things so that things sound so good. And underlying, there are huge problems, as you're pointing out, Roxana. So it just sounds so good, but then you got to talk to people, say, not so good. Here's the problem. It goes deeper than this. So that's what I think we got to do, is build more, take it to the public, and eventually like go to the ballot. Go to, like, you know, go, and then legislators, if they get pressure from more of the public too, that, you know, they kind of want to keep their jobs, you know, so, you know, and I'm really mad at the legislature right now, so I shouldn't be talking to them because healthcare. But anyway, I think it's just got to expand beyond like just the community college faculty and into like further. Rant over. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Orny.
Yes, thank you so much, Eric, Roxana, and Wendy. I have to say this. I really agree with John, and I think we need to hold our legislators accountable. You know, the CNA nurses, the California Nurses Association, had about 3 hours of live Facebook meeting with the Senator, Assemblyman Carla, because he decided not to call a vote for AB 1400. And I watched that whole thing. I am telling you, I just couldn't stop. And those people were serious. They asked him direct questions. Why did you do so? Why did you betray us? All those things. And he really had to answer to them. And they made it clear. The chair of the Democratic committee in Sacramento, Amar, basically said, you know, and everyone said, just so you know, we will pull our endorsement for all those who who were not for this bill, for all those who turned their backs on working people, for those who refused to give the right to health care, for all those workers, all those people in California. The list went on and on. So really, we need to hold our legislators accountable. They need to know their jobs really also depend on the voters. Thank you.
Thank you, Orny. I'd like to thank our panelists, Wendy, Erin, and Roxana. I'm going to turn it over to Herman Lee, who will speak a little bit about FACC for us. Thank you all.
Hi, wow, what an enlightening and engaging conversation. Thank you to all the speakers. And it was asked earlier, what can I do? What can we do, right? And you know, as FACCC membership coordinator, you know, I have a couple suggestions. You know, and as Wendy mentioned, you know, we need 50,000 faculty advocates to reclaim the narrative. So, you know, I got 2 things. You know, first, please join our listserv to keep informed. That's really important. I will put the information on the chat. And then, you know, second, if you found value in this session, which I know I did, please show your support by becoming a member if you're already not. You know, if you were wondering, we're a super affordable association as little as $21 for full-time faculty, and it's only $7 for part-time faculty. So, but as modest as that is, your support goes so far in continuing to do these types of events and advocacy in Sacramento. So I'm gonna, oh, well, Wendy beat me to the punch. I think she already entered that. And then I'm gonna put in a link to how to join if you're not already a member. Thank you all so much, especially to the speakers. It was so engaging and interesting.
Everyone, have a great day.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thanks for
Thank
coming.
you.